আজ আমরা যারা এখানে উপস্থিত আমরা সবাই একরকম নয়। আমাদের আদর্শ আলাদা, অভিজ্ঞতা আলাদা, দৃষ্টিভঙ্গিও আলাদা, কিন্তু তারপরেও আমরা একসাথে বসেছি, আলোচনা করছি, কারণ আমরা সবাই দেশের জন্য, দেশের মানুষের জন্য ভাবছি। আর এই ভিন্নতা নিয়ে একসাথে কথা বলছি, একের পর এক শুনছি, এটাই গণতন্ত্রের আসল সৌন্দর্য। আমার আগে যারা সম্মানিত প্যানেলিস্টরা কথা বলেছেন তাদের সবাইকে আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ জানাই। আপনারা অনেক কিছু বলেছেন, হয়তো বা আমিও বলে ফেলবো, সো আমাদের একটা মাইন্ডসেটে আই থিঙ্ক সিমিলারিটি আছে। আমার খুব ভালো লেগেছে শুনে। আমি আজ এখানে দাঁড়িয়েছি ভিন্ন এক অনুভূতি ও আবেগ নিয়ে। বাংলাদেশের এই পলিসি লেভেলটায় আমার প্রথম বক্তব্য এটা। আমি এমন কেউ নয় যার কাছে সব প্রশ্নের উত্তর আছে বা সব সমস্যার সমাধান জানা আছে। তবু আমি বিশ্বাস করি নিজের ছোট্ট জায়গা থেকেও সমাজের জন্য, দেশের জন্য কিছু করার আন্তরিকতা আমাদের সবার মধ্যে থাকা উচিত। আজ আমি এসেছি শুধু শুনতে, শিখতে এবং একসাথে কাজ করার মনোভাব নিয়ে এগিয়ে যেতে। Today's dialogue is about women shaping the nation. But before we speak about shaping the future, we must be honest about the everyday lives, realities shaping women's lives in Bangladesh. My earliest understanding of women's roles in society came from my family, as it does for most of us. Long before we encounter policies or laws or institutions, our homes become our first classrooms. They teach us what is possible, what is acceptable, and what is expected. In my home, certain things were never questioned. It was never questioned whether a woman could pursue an exemplary medical career while raising a family. It was never questioned whether a woman could build a nationwide social welfare organization on her own merit. It was never questioned whether a woman was fit to lead, to command authority in a room full of men. And it was never questioned whether the men in our lives would stand alongside the women in their lives as equals. My mother continued to excel professionally as a cardiologist in government hospitals, often in patriarchal settings, because she had encouragement and support at home to balance both career and family. In 1979, my nanu, 𝗖𝗲𝗹𝗶𝗀𝗵𝘁𝘀𝗶𝗀, began using her own home to open a free elementary school for vulnerable and disadvantaged children. What began as a personal act of care grew into one of the earliest NGOs in Bangladesh, 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁𝘀, creating meaningful and lasting change in young people's lives. The belief that women's dignity must be recognized both privately and publicly was also reflected in my grandparents' lives and leadership beyond our family. My grandfather, President Zaima Rahman, understood that development was incomplete if women were excluded. He saw women as capable contributors at home, at work, and in public life. And that belief carried into the choices he made as a leader. Under his leadership, the expansion of the garment sector meant millions of women entered formal work for the first time, gaining independence and income. The creation then of the Ministry of Women's Affairs reflected a conviction that improving the lives of women and girls required intention and structure. These were not just policy decisions, but they were an extension of the values that he lived by personally. That foundation was carried forward by my grandmother, 𝗥𝗶𝗴𝗵𝘁𝘀𝗶, who understood the transformative power of education that gave women voice, choice, and confidence. Under her leadership, girls' education was treated as a right, not a privilege. Free secondary schooling, alongside programs such as food for education, cash for education, helped to keep millions of girls in schools and change the course of families across the country. Her female secondary school assistance project achieved gender parity for the first time in secondary education and became a model replicated beyond Bangladesh. আমি যদি একটু সময় নিয়ে অ্যাকচুয়ালি একটা ঘটনা মনে এসেছে দাদুর ব্যাপারে। এটা বলতে বলতে দাদু যখন আমাদের সাথে লন্ডনে ছিলেন গত বছর প্রথমের দিকে, উনি যখন এসেছিলেন তখন হাসপাতালে ছিলেন কিছু চিকিৎসার জন্য। ওখানে বিভিন্ন দেশ থেকে নার্স ছিল, ডাক্তার ছিলেন, এবং একটি নার্স ছিলেন নাইজেরিয়া ওয়েস্ট আফ্রিকাতে। আম্মা আব্বা একদিন দাদুকে সকাল সকাল দেখতে গেছিল, তো নার্স তারপরে বলেছে যে, ও আমি তো আপনার মাকে চিনেছি। বললো কিভাবে? আপনার মাই প্রথম ইলেক্টেড প্রাইম মিনিস্টার বাংলাদেশের না? আম্মু আব্বু তো অবাক, হ্যাঁ আপনি কিভাবে জানেন? তো নার্স তারপরে বললো যে আপনাদের যে উনি যে এত কিছু করেছেন এই মেয়েদের শিক্ষার জন্য, স্পেশালি প্রাইমারি এডুকেশন, ফুড ফর এডুকেশন, ক্যাশ ফর এডুকেশন, এগুলো আমাদের সরকার ওই 35-30 বছর আগে দেখে ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করেছিল। আর ওই কারণে লক্ষ লক্ষ মেয়েরা গ্রাম অঞ্চলে, ওদের দেশে গ্রাম অঞ্চলে বিভিন্ন জায়গায় সদরে এখনো শিক্ষা পাচ্ছে, অন্তত প্রাইমারি এডুকেশন লেভেলে। সো ভাবলাম একটু শেয়ার যদি করি, এখানেই করবো আপনাদের সাথে। জি। She also understood that education alone was not enough if women were not supported to remain in public and economic life. Supporting women to access credit, build livelihoods, and grow small businesses mattered. So did recognizing the realities of motherhood, of childcare, and that required systems being strengthened around maternity leave and childcare, which she did. That is because women were made to choose between family and participation in the economy. For me, these legacies show the values that I saw both reflected at home and in public. I was privileged to grow up surrounded by exceptional women, confident, capable, and accomplished. I was equally fortunate to have male role models, including my father and my grandfather, who valued those women and never felt threatened by their strength or ambition. In fact, the 4 most important people in my father's life, in my opinion, have been women for decades. And he has treated them with deep respect and reverence, not as an exception, but as the norm. Because of this, I grew up with what I now recognize was a skewed understanding of society. Living between Bangladesh and the UK taught me something important. Policies and access alone do not create equality. You can expand education, pass laws, set national targets, but if social norms and daily expectations and mindsets remain unequal, empowerment remains fragile. This is not about overt discrimination. Inequality often survives through habit and comfort, through what feels normal. In Bangladesh, women still perform around 85% of unpaid household and care work, spending over 7 times as many hours as men on this labor each day. This work is valued at 19% of our GDP and remains largely invisible in economic planning and national decision-making. This makes something very clear. Gender equality is not a women's issue, it is an economic and national issue. When women carry the bulk of responsibility, their participation in the formal economy suffers. Despite significant gains in girls' education, women's labor force participation in Bangladesh remains below 40% compared to over 80% for men. Women are far more likely to step back from paid work after marriage or childbirth, not because they lack ability or ambition, but because systems assume they will absorb the cost. This imbalance begins early. Girls are expected to adjust their ambitions around family needs, while boys are rarely taught that responsibility and care are shared obligations. Over time, this became structural and progress stalls. Women are already leaders, and many of those leaders are in this room today. Women who have carried institutions, families, movements, and communities forward, generation after generation. Bangladesh's progress bears your fingerprints, even when history has not always said your name out loud. This brings me to a central point. Belief means nothing without action. To the men among us, our fathers, our brothers, our sons, our husbands, our colleagues and friends, your support for women's rights matters. Your celebration of women's success matters, But equality cannot survive on words alone. If systems and expectations continue to rely on women's sacrifice as the default, inequality continues comfortably. Fathers, in particular, I believe, have a unique role in breaking this cycle. I'm an only child, and I never was once made to feel that my parents wished for a son instead. My father once scolded someone for even asking that question. He understood that while I was treated with respect and care at home, the world outside would not always be the same. So he made sure that I could navigate it with confidence. What shaped me were not his speeches, but his consistency. Through his daily choices, he showed me what I should expect from the world. This is how change becomes sustained. When men confront in our lives, in our homes, unconscious bias honestly and model their behavior through respect and action, they create space for women, not just to survive, but to thrive. In Bangladesh, the cost of inaction is visible. Girls' dropout rates sharply rise during adolescence. Women in public life, in leadership, face harsher judgment. In Bangladesh alone, there's a statistic that 78% of women have faced harassment online, primarily from Facebook. Education and opportunity collapse if inequality at home and in mindset remains untouched. And for a country facing climate change, economic and political transition, demographic pressure, Bangladesh cannot afford to sideline half its population through exhaustion and social expectation. When women are welcomed rather than sidelined, they do not only change their own lives, they change the future of their families and the future of the nation. If Bangladesh wants progress, not symbolic success stories, but sustained national development, then empowerment cannot stop only at classrooms, only in offices or policies. They must reach our homes, our institutions, and our mindsets, and it must be the responsibility of all of us. I thank you all for engaging in an inclusive dialogue today that reflects the true spirit of progress.